The wind howled like a wounded animal across the Montana plains, and Beatrice Taylor knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die out here in the snow. January 1882 had brought the worst blizzard anyone could remember, and her stage-coach driver had abandoned the overturned coach 3 hours ago, taking the only horse that hadn't broken its leg in the accident. She huddled against the wooden wreckage, her fine Boston traveling clothes offering about as much protection as tissue paper against the relentless cold that seemed determined to freeze her solid. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago, and now she couldn't feel her toes either. 22 years old, and she was going to become just another cautionary tale about Eastern women who thought they could handle the West. Her father's disappointed face swam before her eyes. She had been so determined to prove she could make it to her uncle's ranch outside of Helena on her own, refusing the escort he'd offered to send. Pride, it seemed, was going to kill her. Through the white curtain of falling snow, something moved. Beatrice blinked, certain she was hallucinating. But no, there it was again. A dark shape, tall and broad, leading what looked like 2 horses. She tried to call out, but her lips were too frozen to form words properly. The sound that emerged was more of a croak than anything human. The figure changed direction, heading straight toward her. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. A man, bundled in a heavy coat and wearing a wide-brimmed hat that somehow stayed on his head despite the wind. A bandana covered the lower half of his face, but she could see his eyes. They were the color of storm clouds, gray and intense, and right now they were focused entirely on her. He didn't say a word. He simply bent down, scooped her up like she weighed nothing at all, and carried her to the larger of his 2 horses. She wanted to protest, to say something, anything, but her body had given up on following her commands. He settled her in front of him on the saddle, wrapped his coat around both of them, and urged the horse forward into the blinding white. Beatrice drifted in and out of consciousness. She was vaguely aware of movement, of the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them, of the solid warmth of the man behind her. He still hadn't spoken, not a single word. She tried to see his face again, but the effort was too much, and darkness pulled her under. When she woke, she was lying on something soft. A bed. The room around her was small and dim, lit only by the orange glow of a fireplace. She was wearing a nightgown that definitely wasn't hers, and she was buried under what felt like every blanket in Montana. The wind still howled outside, but here it was warm and safe. "You're awake." The voice was deep and quiet, coming from somewhere to her left. She turned her head, wincing at the stiffness in her neck. The man from the snow sat in a wooden chair near the fire. He'd removed his coat and hat, and she could finally see him properly. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. Handsome in a rough, unpolished way. He watched her with those gray eyes, his expression unreadable. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a raspy whisper. "My ranch, about 15 miles north of Lovelock." He stood, moving to a small table where a pot sat steaming. He poured something into a cup and brought it to her. "Drink this. It's just broth, but you need something warm in you." She struggled to sit up, and he helped her, propping pillows behind her back without being asked. His hands were gentle despite their obvious strength. She took the cup and sipped carefully. The broth was simple but hot, and it felt like heaven sliding down her throat. "Thank you," she said when she could speak more easily. "You saved my life. I'm Beatrice Taylor from Boston. I was traveling to my uncle's ranch when the storm hit." He nodded, returning to his chair. "Coleman Hayes." She waited for him to say more, but he didn't. He just sat there watching the fire. After a long moment of silence, she tried again. "How long was I out there?" "Long enough." His jaw tightened. Another hour and I wouldn't have found you in time. How did you find me at all, in this storm? Was checking the fence lines before the worst of it hit. Saw the coach go over about a quarter-mile from my property. He finally looked at her again. Your driver. He took the only good horse and left. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. Something flickered in Coleman's eyes. Anger maybe, though it was hard to tell. Martin Jessup. Should have known man's a coward. You know him, small territory. Everyone knows everyone. He stood abruptly. You should rest. Storm's not letting up anytime soon. You'll be here a while. How long is a while? He moved to the window, pulling back a rough curtain to peer outside. Could be days, could be weeks. This is a bad one. He let the curtain fall. I'll sleep in the barn, you take the cabin. I can't take your bed, this is your home. Not up for discussion. His tone was firm but not unkind. You nearly died today, you need proper rest. He grabbed his coat from a peg by the door. There's more wood by the fire, more blankets in the chest. I'll bring food in the morning. Wait, she called out as he reached for the door handle. Thank you. Really, I don't know how I'll ever repay you. He paused, his back to her. Don't need repayment for doing what's right. Then he was gone, slipping out into the storm before she could say another word. Beatrice lay back against the pillows, staring at the rough wooden ceiling. She'd been in Montana less than a day and had already nearly died and been rescued by the quietest man she'd ever met. She thought of her life back in Boston. The parties, the suitors her father kept pushing at her, the suffocating expectations. She'd fled west looking for freedom, for adventure, for something real. Well, she'd certainly found real. She just hoped she'd survive it. Sleep claimed her again, deep and dreamless. When she woke, pale gray light filtered through the window. The storm still raged outside, but it seemed less violent than before. She sat up slowly, relieved to find that her body, while stiff and sore, seemed to be working properly again. Her fingers and toes tingled with returning circulation, a painful but welcome sensation. The fire had burned down to embers. She pushed back the blankets and was about to get up to add more wood when the door opened. Coleman entered, bringing a blast of cold air and swirling snow with him. He carried an armload of wood and something that smelled absolutely wonderful. Morning, he said, his usual economy of words. He rebuilt the fire with practiced efficiency, then set a covered pot near the flames. Made breakfast, figured you'd be hungry. Starving, she admitted. She was suddenly acutely aware that she was wearing only a nightgown. My clothes. Hanging to dry. He nodded toward a corner where her traveling dress hung on a makeshift line. Won't be ready for a bit yet. They were soaked through. He moved toward the door. I'll step out while you eat. You don't have to. This is your home. I'm the intruder here. He hesitated, his hand on the door. Not proper, Mr. Hayes. You've already seen me nearly frozen to death and changed my clothes. I think propriety might be a bit beyond us at this point. She managed a smile. Besides, you should eat too. You must be hungry after sleeping in the barn. After a long moment, he nodded and removed his coat. He brought 2 plates to the bedside, along with forks. The pot contained eggs and fried potatoes, simple but perfectly cooked. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the wind outside. This is delicious, Beatrice said. Thank you, he nodded, not looking at her. So you run this ranch alone? Yes. That must be hard work. It is. She waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. She tried a different approach. How long have you been here? 5 years. Bought the land with money I saved up working cattle drives. He took another bite of eggs. It's not much, but it's mine. I think it's wonderful, she said honestly. Owning your own land, being your own master, that's why I came west, to find that kind of freedom. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened slightly. What were you running from? The question caught her off guard. What makes you think I was running from anything? Women like you don't usually travel alone to Montana in the dead of winter unless they're running from something. Or to something, I suppose. Both, maybe. She set down her empty plate. My father wanted me to marry a banker. A good match, he said. Secure future. But the man was 45 and boring as dirt. I wanted more than a secure future. I wanted to actually live. She laughed, a bit bitterly. Though I nearly ended that living permanently yesterday. Your uncle know you're coming. Yes, he's probably worried sick by now. The stage was supposed to arrive 2 days ago. Can't get word to him until the storm breaks. Coleman stood, collecting the plates. But he knows these storms. He'll figure you're holed up somewhere safe. Thanks to you I am. He didn't respond to that, just carried the dishes to a wash basin. Beatrice watched him move around the small cabin. Everything he did was efficient, no wasted motion. There was something almost graceful about it, despite his size. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, but he moved like someone who was comfortable in his own skin. Can I ask you something? She said. He glanced over his shoulder. You just did. A joke. Small, but it was there. She smiled. Can I ask you something else? Go ahead. Why don't you talk much? He was quiet for a long moment, washing the plates with careful attention. Never saw much point in talking just to fill silence. Most people say a lot without meaning much of anything. Figured it's better to speak when you've got something worth saying. That's a fair philosophy. What about you? You talk a lot, she laughed. Back home, I was always being told to be quieter, more demure. Apparently, I have too many opinions for a proper lady. Nothing wrong with having opinions. He dried his hands on a towel. Long as you can back them up. I think we'll get along just fine, Mr. Hayes. Coleman, just Coleman. Then I'm just Beatrice. Or B, if you prefer. He nodded, and she could have sworn she saw the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. The day passed slowly. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Coleman went out periodically to tend to his animals, returning each time dusted with snow and looking like a man-shaped icicle. Beatrice's strength returned gradually, and by afternoon she was able to get out of bed and move around the cabin, though Coleman had insisted she keep wrapped in blankets. The cabin was small but well built, everything in its place. One room served as bedroom, kitchen, and living area. A small table with 2 chairs sat near the window. Shelves held provisions and a few books, their spines worn from reading. She examined the titles with interest. Shakespeare, Dickens, a collection of poetry, not what she'd expected from a quiet cowboy. You're a reader, she said, running her finger along the book's spines. Coleman looked up from the harness he was mending near the fire. Winters are long out here, need something to pass the time. May I, she gestured to the books, help yourself. She selected a volume of poetry and settled into the chair opposite him, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. They sat like that for hours, him working leather with steady hands, her reading, occasionally glancing up to watch him work. The silence between them was comfortable, not awkward. Strange, she thought, how she felt more at ease with this taciturn stranger than she'd ever felt at any Boston social gathering. You ever get lonely out here? She asked as evening shadows began to fill the cabin. His hands paused in their work. Sometimes, but lonely's better than being surrounded by people and still feeling alone. You sound like you're speaking from experience. I grew up in St. Louis. Big family, lots of noise, lots of people telling you who you should be and what you should do. He resumed his work. Came west soon as I was old enough. Never looked back. I understand that feeling more than you know. He looked at her then, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. 2 people who'd both fled one kind of life in search of another. I should start supper, he said, standing. You like venison? I've never had it. then you're in for a treat. He cooked the way he did everything else, efficiently and without fuss, but the resulting meal was surprisingly good. The venison was tender, seasoned with herbs he'd grown himself and dried for the winter. There were biscuits, too, and canned vegetables from his root cellar. "You're quite the cook," Beatrice said. "Where did you learn? Necessity. Can't afford to eat poorly out here, need your strength." "Did someone teach you?" "My mother, mostly. She died when I was 15. He said it matter-of-factly, but she could hear the old pain underneath. "Wanted to make sure I could take care of myself." "I'm sorry," he shrugged. "Was a long time ago, but I'm grateful for what she taught me." After supper, Coleman insisted on sleeping in the barn again, despite Beatrice's protests. She was starting to feel guilty about displacing him from his own bed, but he wouldn't hear any arguments. She lay awake for a while after he left, listening to the storm and thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. 3 days ago, she'd been in a comfortable hotel in Chicago, anxiously anticipating her arrival in Montana. Now she was snowbound in a tiny cabin with a man she'd just met, wearing borrowed nightclothes and feeling more alive than she had in years. The storm continued through the next day and the next. They fell into a routine. Coleman would rise early and tend to the animals, return for breakfast, then occupy himself with various ranch tasks that could be done indoors. Saddles needed mending, tools needed sharpening, accounts needed updating. Beatrice helped where she could, though she quickly realized her Boston upbringing hadn't prepared her for much that was useful on a ranch. "I feel useless," she admitted on the 3rd day, watching him repair a bridle with neat, precise stitches. "You're working constantly, and I'm just sitting here." "You're recovering. That's what you should be doing." "I'm recovered. Honestly, I feel fine now." He studied her critically. "Color's better, you're moving easier, all right." He set down his work. "You want to help? Can you cook?" "Simple things, nothing fancy." "Fancy's not what we need." "How about bread? Can you make bread?" "I think so. It's been a while, but my grandmother taught me." He showed her where the flour and other supplies were kept, and she set to work. It felt good to be doing something productive, even something as simple as mixing dough. Her first loaves came out a bit lopsided, but Coleman ate his portion without complaint. "Not bad," he said, which from him seemed like high praise. "You're being generous. I'm being honest. I've had worse. Much worse." She laughed and was rewarded with one of his rare, almost smiles. They talked more as the days passed. Or rather, Beatrice talked and Coleman listened, occasionally contributing a comment or question. She told him about Boston, about her life there, about the endless round of social obligations and expectations. He told her in his sparse way about his life on the ranch, about the cattle he raised, about his plans to expand the operation. "It's hard work," he said one evening as they sat by the fire after supper. "Most years I barely break even, but it's mine, every inch of it. Nobody can take that away from me. That matters to you, independence, more than just about anything." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Probably why I never married. Haven't met many women who'd be willing to live like this." "Like what?" "Isolated, hard winters, no luxuries. Just work and more work." Beatrice was quiet for a moment. "I don't think that sounds so bad." He glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. "You say that now, but you're from the city. You're used to having things, people, entertainment. You think I don't know my own mind?" "I think it's easy to romanticize a life you haven't lived yet." She felt a flash of irritation. "And I think you're assuming you know what I want based on where I'm from." They stared at each other across the fire. Then Coleman shook his head slowly. "You're right. That wasn't fair. I apologize." The apology took the wind out of her sails. "I apologize too. I shouldn't have snapped at you. You've been nothing but kind to me. You've got spirit. That's good. You'll need it out here." I intend to stay, in Montana. I'm not going back to Boston. Your uncle's place. For a start. Eventually, I'd like my own place, something small maybe, but mine, he nodded slowly. That's a good dream. On the fifth day, Beatrice woke to something different. It took her a moment to realize what it was. Silence. The wind had stopped. She got out of bed and hurried to the window, pulling back the curtain. The world outside was buried under snow, but the sky was clear and blue, the sun shining brilliantly off the white expanse. Coleman came in a few minutes later, stamping snow off his boots. Storm's broken. Should be able to dig out in a day or two once things settle. That's wonderful. She tried to sound enthusiastic, but something in her chest felt heavy. In a day or two, she'd leave. She'd go to her uncle's ranch, and Coleman would go back to his solitary life, and this strange interlude would be over. He was watching her with those perceptive gray eyes. What's wrong? Nothing. I'm just glad the storm's over. You're a terrible liar. She laughed despite herself. All right, I suppose I've gotten used to being here, strange as it sounds. Not so strange. He moved to the stove to start coffee. Sometimes I think this cabin's too quiet, nice having someone to talk to or listen to anyway. Coleman Hayes, was that a joke? Might have been. She found herself smiling. These past few days had shown her a different side of him. He was still quiet, still economical with his words, but she'd learned to read the subtle changes in his expression, the slight softening around his eyes when he was amused, the way his jaw tightened when he was thinking hard about something. She'd also learned that he was deeply kind, incredibly capable, and more intelligent than he let on. She'd also learned that she enjoyed his company more than she'd enjoyed anyone's in a very long time. That realization should have been alarming. Instead, it felt oddly right, like something clicking into place. They spent the day digging out. The snow was waist-deep in places, and the work was exhausting. But it felt good to be outside, to be moving, to be doing something. Coleman showed her how to shovel efficiently, where to pile the snow so it wouldn't drift back. They worked side by side, falling into an easy rhythm. "You're stronger than you look," he said at one point, leaning on his shovel. "I'll take that as a compliment." It is one. By evening, they'd cleared a path to the barn and the well. Coleman declared it good enough for now. They were both soaked with melted snow and exhausted. Beatrice had blisters on her hands despite the gloves Coleman had found for her. "Let me see," he said when they were back inside. She held out her hands and he examined them with a frown. "Should have checked sooner. You're not used to this kind of work." "I'll survive. They're just blisters." He disappeared into a corner and returned with a small tin of salve. "Give me your hand." She did, and he applied the salve gently, his large hands surprisingly delicate. She found herself very aware of his touch, of how close he was standing, of the way his dark hair fell across his forehead as he bent over her hands. "There," he said, finishing with her second hand. "That should help." "Thank you." He didn't step back immediately. They stood there closer than necessary, and Beatrice felt her heart start to beat faster. She looked up at him, and his gray eyes were intense, searching her face for something. "Beatrice," he said, his voice rough. "Yes." But whatever he'd been about to say, he swallowed it. He stepped back, putting proper distance between them. "You should change out of those wet clothes. I'll start supper." That night, after he'd gone to the barn, Beatrice lay awake for a long time. Tomorrow or the next day, they'd be able to make the journey to her uncle's ranch. This would all be over. She'd probably never see Coleman again, or if she did, it would be in passing, a polite nod in town. The thought made her chest ache. She was being ridiculous, she told herself. She'd known him less than a week. You couldn't possibly develop real feelings for someone that quickly. Except, she had the sinking suspicion that she had done exactly that. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The snow had a crust on it now, making travel possible if not easy. Coleman came in earlier than usual, his expression serious. "I can get you to your uncle's place today if you want. Roads should be passable with the horses." "Oh, that's good." "Is it?" She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean you don't sound like you think it's good." "Coleman, I can't stay here forever. This is your home, your life. I'm just someone who got stranded in a storm." "Is that what you think?" He moved closer. "That you're just someone? What else would I be? I don't know. Was hoping to find out." He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "I'm not good at this, at talking about feelings, but these past few days, having you here, it's been the best time I've had since I came to Montana. And I think maybe you felt it too." Her breath caught. "I did, I do." "Then why do you sound like you're planning to leave and never come back?" "Because I don't know what else to do. I barely know you. You barely know me. This is all happening so fast. Some things you just know." He took her hands, careful of her blisters. "I know that I look forward to waking up knowing I'll see you at breakfast. I know that the silence doesn't feel so heavy when you're here. I know that the thought of you leaving makes me feel like something's being ripped out of my chest." "Coleman." His name came out as barely a whisper. "I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. Just don't disappear. Let me see you again. Let us figure out if this thing between us is real." "It feels real to me too." He lifted one of her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "So stay. Not here, not yet. That wouldn't be proper. But go to your uncle's, get settled, and let me come calling. Let me court you the right way. I'd like that." She felt tears pricking her eyes and didn't know why. "I'd like that very much." He pulled her into his arms then, and she went willingly, pressing her face against his chest. He smelled like wood smoke and leather, and something indefinably him. His arms around her felt like safety, like home, like everything she'd been searching for without knowing it. They stood like that for a long moment before he finally, reluctantly, pulled back. "We should go before the weather turns again. Can you be ready in an hour?" "Yes." The journey to her uncle's ranch took most of the day. The snow made travel slow, and they had to stop frequently to rest the horses. But Beatrice didn't mind. It gave her more time with Coleman, riding through the stunning winter landscape, the mountains sharp and clear against the blue sky. Her uncle's ranch was bigger than Coleman's, a sprawling operation with a main house, several outbuildings, and miles of fenced pasture. Her uncle, Robert Turner, met them at the door, his weathered face creased with relief. "Beatrice, thank God. We've been beside ourselves with worry." He pulled her into a bear hug, then held her at arm's length to look her over. "You look well, considering. Young Hayes taking good care of you. He saved my life, Uncle Robert. The stagecoach overturned in the storm, and he found me before I froze." Her uncle turned to Coleman, shaking his hand firmly. "Then I'm in your debt. Name it, son. Whatever you need." "No debt," Coleman said. "Just glad I found her in time." "Nonsense. You'll stay for supper at least. Won't hear otherwise." Coleman glanced at Beatrice, and she nodded slightly. "Thank you, sir. I'd be honored." The house was warm and welcoming, filled with the smell of cooking food and the sound of voices. Her uncle's wife, Margaret, fussed over Beatrice, insisting she change into proper clothes and warm herself by the fire. Her cousin, Sarah, who was close to her age, bombarded her with questions about Boston and the journey west. But through it all, Beatrice found her eyes drawn to Coleman. He sat at the table, looking slightly uncomfortable in the bustling household, answering her uncle's questions about his ranch with his typical brevity. When their eyes met across the room, something warm unfurled in her chest. After supper, as Coleman was preparing to leave, Beatrice walked him to the door. "I'll come by in a few days," he said quietly. "If that's all right." "It's more than all right." He hesitated, then reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I'm glad you're safe. Thanks to you." After he'd gone, riding off into the gathering dusk, Sarah appeared at her elbow with a knowing smile. "So, Coleman Hayes. What about him?" "Oh, don't play coy with me. I saw the way you two were looking at each other. And I've never seen Coleman look at anyone like that before. You know him." "Everyone knows Coleman. He keeps to himself mostly, but he's well respected. Quiet, hardworking, honest. There are at least 3 unmarried women in Lovelock who have set their caps at him, but he's never shown interest in any of them." She linked her arm through Beatrice's. "Until now, apparently." That night, tucked into a comfortable bed in her uncle's house, Beatrice should have felt relieved. She was safe, warm, with family who cared about her. But instead, she felt oddly restless. She kept thinking about the little cabin, about the peaceful quiet, about Coleman's steady presence. She fell asleep remembering the feel of his arms around her and woke with his name on her lips. Coleman came calling 3 days later, riding up to the house in the late morning. He was freshly shaved and wearing what were clearly his best clothes, though they were still plain and practical. He carried a small bunch of winter wildflowers that he must have searched hard to find in all the snow. "Miss Taylor," he said formally when she answered the door. "I was hoping I might take you for a ride if your uncle permits." Her uncle did permit, after giving Coleman a long, appraising look that seemed to satisfy him. Beatrice bundled up in a warm coat and let Coleman help her onto one of her uncle's horses. They rode out across the snow-covered range, the mountains looming in the distance. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Thought I'd show you something." He led her to a high ridge that overlooked the valley. From here, she could see for miles in every direction. The land rolled away in white waves, broken by dark lines of trees and the occasional ranch building. It was beautiful and wild and vast. "This is Montana," Coleman said, sitting his horse beside hers. "This is what you came for, isn't it? The big sky, the open space, room to breathe." "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, this is exactly what I came for." They sat in silence for a while, just looking out over the land. Then Coleman said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting your own place eventually. It made me think about my place, about how it could be more, how it could be better. Your ranch is wonderful as it is. It's functional, gets the job done. But it's not a home, not really, just a place where I sleep and work. Been thinking lately it could be more than that. With the right person, I mean." She turned to look at him. "Coleman, I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other, but I'm 30 years old, Beatrice. I know my own mind. And I know that something in my life changed the moment I found you in that storm." He met her eyes. "I'm not much. I've got a small ranch, no money to speak of, and I'm not good at fancy words. But I'm honest, and I'm hardworking, and I think I could make you happy if you'd give me the chance. You're not asking me to marry you right now, are you?" She tried to keep her tone light, but her heart was racing. "No, not yet. That would be rushing things, and I want to do this right. I'm asking if I can keep coming around, if we can spend time together, get to know each other proper. And then, when winter ends and spring comes, if you still feel the way I hope you feel, maybe then I'll ask you." "And what way is that? Like you might want to stay in Montana after all, with me?" She reached across the space between their horses and took his hand. "I'd like that, all of it. The courting, the getting to know each other. And yes, when spring comes, I think I'll still be here." His smile, when it came, transformed his whole face. It was like watching the sun break through clouds. "Good. That's real good." The winter days that followed fell into a pattern. Coleman came calling 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes more. They'd go riding or sit in her uncle's parlor with Sarah as a chaperone, talking for hours. Or rather, Beatrice talked and Coleman listened. though he was opening up more as time went on, sharing stories from his past, his hopes for the future. He told her about growing up in St. Louis, about feeling trapped in the city, about how he'd worked odd jobs from the time he was 12, saving every penny, about how he joined a cattle drive when he was 17, seeing the West for the first time and knowing he'd found where he belonged. She told him about her mother dying when she was young, about her father remarrying a woman who saw Beatrice as more of an obligation than a daughter, about the endless parade of unsuitable suitors, men who wanted an ornament on their arm, not a partner, about her determination to make her own way in the world. "You're brave," Coleman said one afternoon as they walked through the snowy pastures. "Coming out here on your own, no real plan except to be free, that takes courage. Or foolishness. If you hadn't found me, I'd be dead. But I did find you. Maybe that's fate." "Do you believe in fate?" He was quiet for a moment. "I believe some things are meant to be. Don't know if that's fate exactly, but it's something." The weeks passed. January turned to February, and the days grew incrementally longer. The snow began to melt at the edges, revealing the brown grass beneath. Beatrice had never been happier. Life at her uncle's ranch was good. She helped Aunt Margaret with the household chores, spent time with Sarah, and learned about ranch life from her uncle. But the best days were the ones when Coleman came calling. She was falling in love with him. She knew it as surely as she knew the sun would rise. It was in the way her heart lifted when she saw him riding up the road, in the way his rare smiles made her feel like she'd won something precious, in the way his quiet steadiness made her feel safe in a way she'd never felt before. One evening in late February, they sat in the parlor after supper. Sarah had conveniently found somewhere else to be, though the door was open for propriety's sake. Coleman held Beatrice's hand, tracing idle patterns on her palm. "Spring's coming," he said. "Another month, maybe less, I know. Been thinking about what I said, about waiting until spring to ask you something." Her breath caught. "Yes. Thing is, I already know the answer in my heart. Known it since probably the second day you were at my cabin, but I want to do this right. I want to give you time to be sure." "Coleman, I am sure. You say that now, but you haven't seen Montana in spring yet. Haven't seen how beautiful it is when everything comes to life. Want you to see that before you decide." He lifted her hand to his lips. "Want you to know what you're choosing. I'm choosing you. The season doesn't matter. It matters to me. I want to give you something beautiful. Want to ask you proper, not just because we got snowed in together and it seemed like the practical thing to do." She understood what he was saying, even if part of her wanted to protest. He wanted to court her properly, to do things right. It was part of who he was, this careful integrity. It was one of the things she loved about him. "All right," she said. "We'll wait for spring." "Thank you." He kissed her hand again, then pulled her close. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her cheek. March arrived with warmer temperatures and rain that washed away the last of the snow. The world turned from white to brown to, slowly, green. Buds appeared on the trees. The first flowers pushed up through the soil. Birds returned, filling the air with song. Coleman took Beatrice on long rides across the range, showing her his land and the surrounding territory. They picnicked by streams swollen with snowmelt and watched eagles soar overhead. He taught her about the land, about reading weather and tracking animals, about the rhythms of ranch life. "This is the hard part," he said one day as they rode along his fence line. He was checking for damage from the winter, making notes of repairs needed. "Everyone thinks summer's the hardest, with the heat and the long days, but it's spring that breaks you. Everything's growing, everything's being born. Calves, colts, crops. You've got to be everywhere at once, and there's never enough hours in the day. Sounds exhausting. It is. But it's good too. You're working hard, but you're working towards something. You can see the results of your labor right in front of you." She watched him as he dismounted to examine a broken fence post. He was in his element out here, confident and capable. She tried to imagine what it would be like to be part of this life, to wake up every morning to this view, to work beside him through the seasons. The image came easily, feeling natural and right. "Coleman," she said as he remounted, "it's spring." He looked at her and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "Not quite. Few more weeks until the thaw's done. Are you stalling? Maybe a little." He urged his horse closer to hers. "Truth is, I'm nervous. Never asked a woman to marry me before. You don't have to be nervous with me." "That's where you're wrong. You're the one thing in my life I'm most afraid of losing." The raw honesty in his voice made her chest tight. "You're not going to lose me. I hope not." He reached over and took her hand. "Soon, I promise. Just let me do it right." 2 weeks later, Coleman appeared at the ranch house in the middle of the afternoon on a Wednesday. Beatrice was helping Aunt Margaret with the washing when she heard the knock. By the time she dried her hands and made it to the door, her uncle was already there, talking to Coleman in low voices. "Beatrice," her uncle said when he saw her, "Coleman's here to see you. We'll be on the porch if you need us." Her heart started to race. Coleman stood in the parlor, looking nervous and determined at the same time. He was dressed in his best clothes again, and he was holding a small carved wooden box. "Beatrice," he said. "Would you walk with me?" She nodded, too nervous to speak. They walked out past the barn to a small rise that overlooked the ranch. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The mountains in the distance still had snow on their peaks, but the valleys were green and lush with new growth. "I brought you out here that first time I came calling," Coleman said. "Showed you Montana, showed you what life here would be like, wanted you to know what you'd be getting into. I remember. I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about the answer. Don't just say what you think I want to hear. I would never do that." He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "This life is hard, really hard. The winters are brutal, the summers are harsh, and everything in between is work. My ranch is small, and it's going to take years to build it into something prosperous. There won't be luxuries, not for a long time. There won't be parties or society or any of the things you grew up with. It'll be just you and me and the land and whatever we can make of it together." "Coleman, let me finish." He squeezed her hands. "I can't promise you an easy life, but I can promise you an honest one. I can promise that I'll work every day to make you happy, to build something good with you. I can promise that I'll love you truly and completely for the rest of my days." He opened the wooden box, revealing a simple gold band. "Beatrice Taylor, will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deep and thorough, and she kissed him back with all the feeling that had been building inside her for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were bright with emotion. "I love you," she said. "I've loved you for a while now, and I don't care if life is hard. I don't care if there aren't luxuries. All I care about is being with you. I love you too." He rested his forehead against hers. "From the moment I pulled you out of that snowstorm, frozen and stubborn, I think some part of me knew." They stood there as the sun set, wrapped in each other's arms, making plans. They'd marry in May, they decided. A simple ceremony in Lovelock, just family and a few friends. Then she'd move to Coleman's ranch and they'd start their life together. "Our ranch," Coleman corrected. "Not mine anymore, ours." The word sent a thrill through her. Our ranch, our life, our future. The next weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Aunt Margaret threw herself into planning the wedding with enthusiastic energy. A dress had to be made, food prepared, the small church in Lovelock readied for the ceremony. Coleman's contribution was to add on to his cabin, building a second room so they'd have more space. He worked from dawn to dusk, determined to have it finished before they married. Beatrice helped where she could, learning to cook the hearty meals that ranch life required, practicing the endless domestic skills she'd need. Sarah taught her how to preserve food, how to make soap and candles, how to do the 1,000 little things that kept a household running. "Are you scared?" Sarah asked one afternoon as they worked on Beatrice's wedding dress. "A little," Beatrice admitted. "Not about marrying Coleman. I've never been more sure of anything, but about being good enough, capable enough. What if I can't handle the life? You'll learn, and you'll have Coleman, he'll help you." Sarah smiled. "Besides, I've seen how he looks at you. That man would do anything for you." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, a perfect May morning. Beatrice stood in front of the mirror in her uncle's house, hardly recognizing herself. The dress was simple but elegant, white cotton with delicate embroidery that Aunt Margaret had stayed up late to finish. Her hair was pinned up with wildflowers, and the gold band on her finger caught the light. "You look beautiful," Aunt Margaret said, tears in her eyes. "Your mother would be so proud." The ceremony itself was brief and simple, held in the small church in Lovelock with about 30 people in attendance. Coleman stood at the altar, looking nervous and handsome in a new suit. When Beatrice walked down the aisle on her uncle's arm, his face transformed, that rare, brilliant smile breaking through. They said their vows clearly and firmly, promising to love and honor each other through whatever came. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Coleman kissed her with a gentleness that made her heart ache. Then they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, to the sound of applause and cheering. The celebration afterward was held at her uncle's ranch, with tables set up outside and enough food to feed everyone twice over. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts. Beatrice danced with Coleman, who admitted he wasn't much of a dancer but tried anyway, his arms strong and sure around her. "Happy?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Happier than I've ever been." As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon that would take them home. Home. The word felt strange and wonderful. They rode through the gathering dusk, and Beatrice leaned against Coleman's shoulder, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. The cabin looked different when they arrived. Bigger, with the new room Coleman had added. He'd also built a small covered porch with 2 rocking chairs facing west toward the mountains. He lifted her down from the wagon, then, to her surprise, swept her up into his arms. "Tradition," he said with a smile. "Got to carry you over the threshold." He carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them. The cabin was warm, a fire already burning in the hearth. He'd cleaned everything, made the bed with fresh linens, even put wildflowers in a jar on the table. He set her down gently, and they stood looking at each other in the firelight. "Mrs. Hayes," he said softly, "Mr. Hayes." She reached up to touch his face. "I love you too." He kissed her, slow and deep. "Going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." I could never regret this. Never. That night, in the cabin where she'd first found shelter from the storm, Beatrice began her new life. Coleman made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, and afterward they lay tangled together, talking quietly as the fire burned down to embers. "Are you really happy?" he asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Not scared, not having regrets." "The only thing I regret is not meeting you sooner." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Coleman, I spent my whole life in Boston feeling like I was playing a part, pretending to be someone I wasn't. Here, with you, I finally feel like myself. I know what you mean." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Never felt like I fit anywhere until I came here. And never felt complete, even here, until I found you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the Montana night quiet and still around them. The early days of marriage were an adjustment. Beatrice had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, had to build up calluses on her hands and strength in her arms. She learned to milk the cow Coleman had bought specifically for her, to collect eggs from the chickens without getting pecked, to tell when bread was ready to come out of the oven just by smell. Coleman was patient with her, teaching her what she needed to know without making her feel inadequate. They worked side by side, building their life together one day at a time. It was hard work, harder than Beatrice had ever done in her life, but it was satisfying in a way that nothing else had ever been. Summer came, hot and dry. They worked from dawn until dark, tending the cattle, mending fences, putting up hay for the winter. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch Coleman had built, watching the sunset and talking about their day. Sometimes Coleman would read aloud from one of his books, his deep voice carrying in the quiet. One evening in late July, as they sat watching the stars come out, Coleman said, "Been thinking about expanding the herd next year. If we have a good season, we could afford maybe 20 more head." "That would be wonderful. Means more work, though. Would need to hire help for the roundup. We'll manage." She took his hand. "We always do." He squeezed her fingers. "Never thought I'd have this, a partner, someone to build something with. You've made everything better, Beatrice. You've done the same for me." August brought a brief respite from work, a week between haying and harvest when they could catch their breath. Coleman surprised her by suggesting they take a trip into Helena for supplies and, as he put it, a proper honeymoon, even if it's belated. They spent 3 days in the territorial capital, staying in a modest hotel and exploring the bustling city. Coleman bought her a new dress, insisting despite her protests. She bought him a new hat to replace his battered old one, though she suspected he'd still wear the old one most days. They attended a play at the local theater, ate dinner in an actual restaurant, and walked the streets hand in hand. But as nice as it was, Beatrice found herself eager to return home. Helena felt too crowded, too noisy. She missed the quiet of the ranch, the wide open spaces, ready to go back. Coleman asked on their last morning, and she could hear the relief in his voice. More than ready. The ride home felt like coming back to where they belonged. As the cabin came into view, Beatrice felt something settle in her chest. This was home now, truly home. Not because of the building, but because of the man beside her, because of the life they were creating together. Fall arrived with cooler temperatures and changing leaves. They harvested the garden, putting up vegetables for the winter. Coleman brought in more hay, stacking it carefully in the barn. They worked together to prepare for the cold months ahead, and this time, Beatrice knew what to expect. This time, she'd be ready. One October morning, Beatrice woke feeling queasy. She barely made it outside before she was sick. Coleman was immediately concerned, ready to ride for the doctor, but she stopped him. "I don't think I'm ill," she said slowly. "I think I might be pregnant." His eyes went wide. "Are you sure?" "Not completely. But I've missed my courses, and this sickness in the morning, it's what my aunt described when she was carrying Sarah." He sat down heavily on the porch steps, looking stunned. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. "A baby. We're going to have a baby. You're happy about it." He pulled her down onto his lap, holding her carefully. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, maybe. Want to make sure I do right by you both. But yes, happy. So happy." They rode to Lovelock the next week to see the doctor, who confirmed what Beatrice already knew. The baby would come in late spring, probably May. As they rode home, Coleman was quieter than usual, his brow furrowed in thought. "What are you thinking?" Beatrice asked. "Thinking about the cabin. It's going to be too small with a baby, need to add on more. And we'll need a cradle, blankets, diapers. Need to make sure we have enough supplies put by to see you through the winter and the birth. Coleman, we have months to prepare. I know, but I want everything to be perfect, want you both safe and comfortable." His concern was touching, if a bit overwhelming. As winter set in again, Coleman threw himself into preparations with single-minded determination. He built a third room onto the cabin, this one specifically for the baby. He made a beautiful cradle from smooth pine, carving their initials into the headboard. He made sure they had more than enough supplies, more than enough firewood, more than enough of everything. "You're nesting," Beatrice teased him one evening as he checked their supplies for the third time that week. "Just being prepared. You're being adorable." He pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her growing belly. "Can't help it. You two are everything to me. Need to know you're safe." This winter was different from the last. They were together from the start, and the cabin was truly a home now. Beatrice spent her days cooking, sewing baby clothes, and reading. Coleman worked outside when weather permitted, came in for meals and in the evenings to sit by the fire with her. They talked about names, about the future, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. Coleman told her stories about his own childhood, both good and bad, talking about the kind of father he hoped to become. Beatrice shared her own memories, her hopes and dreams for their growing family. "I want our children to feel loved," Coleman said one snowy evening. "Want them to know they can be whoever they want to be, do whatever they want to do. Won't force them into molds like my father tried to do with me." "They'll know," Beatrice assured him. "They'll have you as an example. That's the best thing we could give them." Spring came again, the second spring since Beatrice had arrived in Montana. The snow melted, revealing the green beneath. The baby's arrival was still a few weeks away, and Beatrice was enormous and uncomfortable, eager for the whole thing to be over. Coleman barely left her side now, worried about the birth. Her aunt and uncle came to stay for a few days, bringing Sarah with them. Sarah had agreed to help with the birth, having assisted the midwife in Lovelock several times. The baby came on a warm May afternoon, exactly 1 year after their wedding. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Coleman, pacing outside, looked ready to tear the door down. But finally, Sarah emerged with a smile. "You have a son," she said. "Both mother and baby are healthy." Coleman rushed inside to find Beatrice propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. He approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby was red-faced and squalling, tiny fists waving in the air. He had dark hair like Coleman's, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they were a murky blue that would probably change. "He's perfect," Coleman breathed. "What should we name him?" They discussed names but hadn't decided. Now, looking at her husband's face, soft with wonder and love, Beatrice knew. "Thomas," she said. "After your mother's father, you said he was a good man." "He was." Coleman's voice was rough with emotion. "Thomas Hayes, that's a good, strong name." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and Beatrice placed the baby in his arms. Coleman held his son with the same careful competence he brought to everything, supporting the tiny head, cradling him close. The baby quieted at his father's touch, seeming to recognize the voice that had talked to him through Beatrice's belly for months. "Hello, Thomas," Coleman whispered. "I'm your father, and I promise you I'm going to do everything I can to be worthy of that title." The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting and overwhelming. Thomas had his days and nights confused, screaming through the dark hours and sleeping peacefully during the day. Beatrice was recovering from the birth and learning to nurse, dealing with all the physical challenges that came with being a new mother. Coleman was amazing through all of it. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with a crying baby so Beatrice could rest, handled the ranch work and the household chores without being asked. One morning, Beatrice woke to find him asleep in the rocking chair he'd made, Thomas sleeping on his chest, Coleman's large hand spread protectively across the baby's small back. The sight made her heart swell so much it hurt. As Thomas grew, the chaos settled into a routine. He was a good baby, curious and alert, watching everything with wide eyes that gradually changed from blue to gray, just like his father's. Coleman was besotted with his son, coming in from work to scoop him up, talking to him seriously as if the baby could understand every word. "He's going to be smart," Coleman told Beatrice one evening as they watched Thomas grab at her rattle. "Look at how focused he is." "He's going to be spoiled is what he's going to be," Beatrice teased. "You give him everything he wants. He's 3 months old. What's he going to want that he shouldn't have? Just wait until he's 2 and asking for something unreasonable. I want to see if you have the spine to tell him no. I'll be firm." But Coleman's face suggested he knew he was going to be wrapped around his son's finger. Summer came again, and life on the ranch continued its seasonal rhythms. Coleman hired 2 ranch hands for the busy season, young men from Lovelock who were hardworking and respectful. With their help, the work went faster, and Coleman could spend more time with his family. They celebrated Thomas's first birthday with a small party, just family and a few friends. Thomas smashed his face into his first piece of cake, getting more on himself than in his mouth, and everyone laughed. Beatrice looked around at the gathered people at the home they'd built, at her husband holding their son, and felt a wave of contentment so strong it brought tears to her eyes. "What's wrong?" Coleman asked, noticing. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right." "More right than I ever dreamed it could be," he kissed her softly. "I know what you mean." The years passed, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. They expanded the ranch gradually, adding more cattle, more land. Some years were good, some were lean, but they weathered them all together. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy with his father's quiet nature and his mother's curiosity. He loved the ranch, loved following Coleman around trying to help with the work. When Thomas was 3, Beatrice became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect and the pregnancy was easier. Their daughter was born in the fall, during the first snow. They named her Rose after Coleman's mother. Rose was nothing like her quiet brother. She was loud and demanding from the start, making her preferences known with a healthy set of lungs. But she was also affectionate and bright, quick to smile, quick to laugh. Coleman was, if possible, even more besotted with his daughter than he'd been with his son. "2 children," Coleman said one night as they lay in bed, both children finally asleep. "Never thought I'd have this. A family." "Do you want more?" Beatrice asked. I think I'd like 1 more. 3 seems like a good number," he pulled her close. "Then we'll have 1 more. Whatever you want, Beatrice. You've given me everything. We've given each other everything." Their 3rd child, another son they named James, arrived 2 years later. The ranch was prosperous now, no longer the struggling operation it had been when Beatrice first arrived. They'd built a new, larger house, though they kept the original cabin as a guest house and for the ranch hands. The new house had glass windows, a real kitchen, and separate bedrooms for the children. But Beatrice's favorite part was still the porch that Coleman had built, now expanded to wrap around the front and side of the house. They'd sit there in the evenings, watching the children play in the yard, looking out at the mountains that had witnessed their journey together. Thomas was 8 now, already showing signs of becoming as good a rancher as his father. Rose was 5, fearless and wild, insisting she could do anything her older brother could do. James was 3, sweet-natured and gentle, content to follow his siblings around or sit with his mother while she read. One evening in late summer, after the children were in bed, Coleman and Beatrice sat on the porch with glasses of lemonade, enjoying the cool breeze. It had been 9 years since the blizzard that brought them together, 9 years of building a life and a family. You ever think about that day? Coleman asked. When I found you in the snow, all the time. If the storm had been a day earlier or later, if you'd checked different fence lines, if any number of things had been different, we might never have met. I think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be. Coleman Hayes, you're getting philosophical in your old age, he laughed. 37 isn't old. You're right. You're distinguished. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him. Beatrice, I need you to know something. What? That day I found you, I thought I was saving someone's life, didn't know I was saving my own. He kissed the top of her head. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me a reason to build something that lasts. You gave me the same thing. Freedom, adventure, love. Everything I came west looking for. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the house, one of the children laughed in their sleep. A cow lowed in the distance. The wind rustled through the grass with its eternal whisper. This was home. This was love. This was everything. As if reading her thoughts, Coleman said, Spring thaw came and you didn't leave. How could I? You were here. I'd have followed you anywhere, you know. If you decided to go back east or anywhere else, I'd have sold the ranch and followed. She sat up to look at him, surprised. You never told me that. Didn't need to. You stayed. He cupped her face in his hand. But it's true. This ranch, this land, it's important to me, but you're everything. You and our children. If I had to choose, there'd be no choice at all. Tears sprang to her eyes. After all these years, he could still move her with his quiet declarations. I love you, Coleman Hayes. More now than ever. Love you too. He kissed her soft and sweet. Every day for the rest of our lives. Over the next years, they watched their children grow. Thomas became a skilled rancher, working alongside his father, learning everything Coleman could teach him. He was 17 now, tall and serious, already catching the eyes of several young women in Lovelock. But he wasn't interested in courting yet, too focused on the ranch and his responsibilities. Rose was 14 and still wild, though she'd learned to channel that wildness into productive pursuits. She was the best rider in the family, fearless on horseback, and she had a way with animals that was almost magical. She talked about becoming a veterinarian, though Coleman worried about how the world would treat a woman in that profession. Let her try, Beatrice had told him. We raised her to believe she could be anything. We can't take that back now just because it might be hard. You're right. As always. James was 12, still gentle-natured, more interested in books than ranching. He wanted to be a teacher to help other children learn. Coleman supported this, though he was secretly disappointed that his youngest son didn't share his passion for the land. Beatrice reminded him that James had his own path to follow, just as they'd each followed theirs. The ranch continued to prosper. They'd become one of the most successful operations in the territory, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Coleman had earned the respect of his neighbors and the community, serving on various local committees, helping settle disputes, always quiet but always fair. Beatrice had become a pillar of the small community as well. She'd helped establish a school in Lovelock, taught reading to several children whose parents couldn't, and was always first to help when a neighbor needed assistance. She'd found her place, her purpose, and it felt as natural as breathing. One spring morning, almost 20 years after the blizzard that had brought them together, Beatrice and Coleman rode out to the ridge where he'd proposed. It had become a tradition of sorts, something they did every year on their anniversary. They stood looking out over the land, now dotted with their cattle, marked with their fences, shaped by their work. 20 years, Beatrice said. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Coleman's hair was starting to gray at the temples now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to Beatrice, he was as handsome as he'd been that first day. Would you do it all again, knowing how hard it would be, in a heartbeat? Every single moment. She took his hand. What about you? Not a single regret, not one. He pulled her into his arms. You're still the best thing that ever happened to me. Even better than that bull you bought last year. I know how excited you were about him. He laughed, the sound rich and warm. Even better than the bull. They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon. The children were there, even Thomas, who'd been at the market in Helena. They'd prepared a special dinner for the anniversary, working together to create a feast. The table was laden with food, and there was even a cake that Rose had attempted, lopsided but made with love. They gathered around the table, this family they'd created, and Coleman said grace. He thanked God for the land, for the bounty, for the health and safety of his family. His voice was steady and sure, and when he finished, everyone added their own amen as they ate, telling stories and laughing. Beatrice looked around the table at each beloved face. Thomas, so much like his father. Rose, fierce and free. James, thoughtful and kind. And Coleman at the head of the table, his gray eyes warm as they met hers. She thought back to that terrified young woman huddled against a wrecked stagecoach, certain she was going to die. If someone had told her then what her life would become, she wouldn't have believed it. This life was so far beyond anything she dared to dream. "What are you thinking?" Coleman asked quietly during a lull in the conversation. "I'm thinking that I'm the luckiest woman alive. I'm the lucky one. We're both lucky," she decided. Lucky to have found each other. Lucky to have this. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, they sat on their porch in the darkness. The sky was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The sound was lonely but beautiful, wild and free. Coleman took Beatrice's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They sat like that in comfortable silence, no words needed. After 20 years together, they'd learned each other's rhythms, each other's silences. They knew what the other was thinking often before a word was spoken. "Next year Thomas will probably be married," Coleman said eventually. "He's been courting that Miller girl even if he thinks we don't know." "I know. Sarah told me. They'll be good together. Makes me feel old thinking about our son getting married. We're not old. We're experienced." She squeezed his hand. "And think about it, we might have grandchildren soon." "Grandchildren," he tried the word out. "That's going to take some getting used to. You'll be a wonderful grandfather, just like you're a wonderful father." "I try. God knows I try." He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I think about the man I was before I met you. Alone in that cabin, working the ranch, just existing day to day. I thought I was content, but I didn't know what content really meant until you. I was the same. Thought I was looking for freedom, for adventure. But what I was really looking for was this. You, a home that's actually a home, not just a building. We built something good here. We really did." They sat in silence for a while longer, then Coleman stood, pulling Beatrice to her feet. "Come on, let's go to bed." "Getting tired in your old age?" "Not tired." He grinned at her, and even after all these years, that grin still made her heart skip. Just thinking we should make the most of having the house to ourselves. Kids are all asleep. She laughed, letting him lead her inside to the bedroom they'd shared for 20 years. He kissed her with the passion of a young man, but the tenderness of someone who'd spent decades learning exactly how to make her happy. And as they came together, Beatrice thought again how grateful she was for that long-ago blizzard, for the stubborn determination that had brought her west, for every choice and chance that had led her to this moment, this man, this life. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and constants in equal measure. Thomas did marry Emily Miller, and they built a house on the far edge of the ranch property. 2 years later, they presented Coleman and Beatrice with their first grandchild, a boy they named Samuel. Coleman, holding his tiny grandson for the first time, had tears in his eyes. "Never thought I'd see this day," he said, his voice rough. "Never thought I'd have all this." Rose eventually did become a veterinarian, fighting hard for the education and training, proving herself again and again until even the skeptics had to admit she knew her business. She set up practice in Lovelock, becoming the first female veterinarian in Montana Territory. She never married, though she had plenty of suitors. She claimed she was married to her work and seemed perfectly content with that choice. James became a teacher as he'd wanted, taking a position at the school in Lovelock that Beatrice had helped establish years before. He married a quiet young woman named Anne, and they had 3 daughters who were all as bookish and gentle as their father. The ranch continued to thrive under Coleman and Thomas's management. They'd expanded significantly, acquiring adjacent properties when they came available, building it into one of the largest and most respected ranches in the territory. When Montana finally achieved statehood in 1889, Coleman was there to witness it, a testament to how far the territory had come. But success and expansion didn't change who Coleman was at his core. He was still the quiet, steady man who'd pulled Beatrice from the snow all those years ago. Still direct and honest, still careful with his words, still devoted to his family above all else. Beatrice had found her place too. She'd become known throughout the region for her kindness and her capability, for her sharp mind and her generous heart. She'd helped countless families over the years, lending a hand during illness or hardship, offering advice and support. She'd turned their ranch into not just a business but a real home, a place where family gathered and friends were always welcome. One winter evening, more than 30 years after they'd first met, Beatrice and Coleman sat by the fire in their home. They were both in their 50s now, hair more gray than dark, faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. Their children were grown and settled. Their grandchildren, 6 of them now, brought joy and chaos in equal measure. "You ever think about Boston?" Coleman asked, watching the flames dance. "Sometimes, but it feels like a different life, a different person, like it happened to someone else. Any regrets about leaving, about the life you gave up?" She looked at him in surprise. "Never, not once. Why would you ask that? I don't know. Sometimes I worry that you sacrificed too much, that you gave up too much for this life, for me." She moved from her chair to sit beside him, taking his weathered hand in hers. "Coleman Hayes, listen to me. What I left behind wasn't a sacrifice, it was an escape. What I found here, what we built together, that's everything. That's life. Real, messy, beautiful life. I just want you to be happy. I am happy. Deliriously, completely happy. Even with all the hard times, all the struggles, I wouldn't change a single thing." She kissed him softly. "You saved my life that day in the blizzard. But you did more than that. You gave me a life worth living." He pulled her close, and they sat like that, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, snow was falling again, as it had that long-ago January day. But this time they were safe and warm, surrounded by everything they'd built together. "I love you," Coleman said into the comfortable silence, "now and always. And I love you, forever." The years that followed were quieter but no less rich. They watched their grandchildren grow, helped when they could with the ranch, and the various businesses their children had established. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, weathered the occasional crisis, mourned when old friends passed on. On their 40th anniversary, their entire family gathered at the ranch for a huge celebration. All three of their children were there with their families. The house and yard were full of people, noise, and love. Thomas gave a toast to his parents, talking about the example they'd set, the legacy they'd created. "My father taught me that hard work and honesty are worth more than gold," Thomas said, raising his glass. "My mother taught me that family and love are what make life worth living." Together, they showed me what it means to build something that lasts. To all of us here, we're all part of that legacy. We're all beneficiaries of the life they built together. There wasn't a dry eye in the house when he finished. Coleman stood, clearly emotional, and pulled Beatrice to her feet beside him. "I'm not much good at speeches," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "But I want to say this. 40 years ago, I was a man alone, working a struggling ranch, convinced that was all I needed. Then a blizzard brought me the greatest gift of my life." He looked at Beatrice, his eyes soft. "You taught me what love really means. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose beyond just surviving. Everything good in my life, it all comes back to you." "You gave me the same," Beatrice said, her voice thick with tears. "You gave me freedom and love and a home. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed." They kissed, and the room erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration continued late into the night, the house full of laughter and music and love. The next morning, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Beatrice and Coleman took their traditional ride to the ridge. It was harder now, their bodies not as young and spry as they once were, but they still made the trip every anniversary. They stood looking out over the land they'd spent 4 decades working, building, nurturing. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to their partnership. 40 years, Beatrice said, leaning against Coleman's shoulder. "Where did the time go? Don't know, but I wouldn't trade a single moment of it. Me neither." She was quiet for a moment. "Coleman, I want you to promise me something. Anything. When it's time, when one of us has to go on without the other, promise me you'll remember this. All of it. The good and the bad, the easy and the hard. Promise me you'll remember that we had something real and true and worth fighting for." "I'll remember." His voice was rough. "But that's not going to be for a long time yet. We've got years left. I hope so. But if not, I want you to know that I'm at peace. I've had a good life, Coleman, the best life, because I had you. Don't talk like that. You're going to outlive us all, stubborn as you are." She laughed through her tears. "Maybe, but I needed to say it anyway." They stood there until the sun began to set, then rode back to the ranch, to the house they'd built, to the life they'd created. That night, they lay in bed together, holding hands in the darkness, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The years continued as they always do. They celebrated their 45th anniversary, then their 50th. By now, they had 8 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. The ranch was being run primarily by Thomas and his sons, though Coleman still went out when he could, unable to fully give up the work that had defined so much of his life. One spring morning, as the thaw was beginning, Coleman woke to find Beatrice still asleep beside him. This wasn't unusual. They both slept later these days, their bodies demanding rest. But something made him look more closely. Her face was peaceful, serene, the lines smoothed away. She looked younger, happier. "Beatrice," he said softly, reaching for her hand. It was cool to the touch. The funeral was held on a clear spring day, the kind of day Beatrice had always loved. What seemed like half of Montana turned out to pay their respects. She'd touched so many lives over the years, helped so many people. The church in Lovelock was packed, with people standing outside to hear the service. Coleman sat in the front pew, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, listening to person after person talk about what Beatrice had meant to them. How she'd helped during a difficult childbirth. How she'd brought food when times were hard. How she'd fought for the school, for better roads, for things that would help the community. How she'd been a friend, a mentor, a pillar of strength. When it was his turn to speak, Coleman stood slowly, his 77 years weighing heavy on him. He looked out at all the faces, all the lives his wife had touched, and felt both grief and pride warring in his chest. "Beatrice came to Montana 50 years ago," he began, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "She was running from one life and toward another. She almost died in a blizzard," he paused, "and I found her, pulled her out of the snow and took her to my cabin. By spring thaw she couldn't imagine leaving, and I couldn't imagine letting her go." He had to stop, swallowing hard. Thomas stood and put a hand on his shoulder, offering silent support. "We had 50 years together," Coleman continued. 50 years of building a life, raising a family, working the land. 50 years of love, not always easy love. We fought sometimes, struggled sometimes, but real love, true love. The kind that lasts. He looked down at his hands, weathered and scarred from decades of work. "She made me a better man, she made me want to be better, and everything good in my life I owe to her." He sat down, unable to continue. Rose was crying openly, and James had his arm around his father's shoulders. Thomas was trying to hold it together for all of them, his jaw tight with the effort. They buried her in the cemetery overlooking the ranch, the mountains rising in the distance. Coleman stood at the graveside long after everyone else had gone, just looking at the fresh earth, trying to accept that she was really gone. "I don't know how to do this without you," he said quietly to the grave. 50 years, Beatrice. How am I supposed to go on without you?" The wind picked up, rustling through the new grass, and Coleman could almost hear her voice on it. "Keep living," she'd say. "Keep working. Keep being there for our family. That's how you honor what we built together." "I'll try," he promised. "God help me, I'll try." The weeks that followed were the hardest of Coleman's life. He moved through them in a fog, going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. His children were worried about him, hovering, trying to help. But there was no help for the kind of grief that sat like a stone in his chest. One evening, about a month after the funeral, Coleman found himself at the original cabin, the small building where he and Beatrice had spent those first days together. It was still there, now used for storage mostly. He went inside and sat on the bed where she'd recovered from her near death in the snow. He could almost see her there, young and stubborn, wrapped in blankets, those blue eyes watching him with curiosity and growing affection. He could almost hear her voice, filling the silence with stories about her life in Boston, about her dreams for the future. "I miss you," he said to the empty room. "Every moment of every day I miss you." He sat there until it was full dark, remembering. Then, slowly, he stood. He walked back to the main house, where Thomas and his family were waiting. His grandchildren ran to greet him, and he hugged them, feeling their solid warmth, their life. This is what she'd want, he realized. Not for him to shut down, to give up. She'd want him to keep living, to keep being part of the family they'd created together. That was how he'd honor her memory. So he did. He kept going, kept working when he could, kept being there for his children and grandchildren. He told them stories about Beatrice, about their life together. making sure they'd remember. He took care of the ranch that they'd built together, making sure the legacy continued. On what would have been their 51st anniversary, Coleman rode out to the ridge alone. He was older now, frailer, but he could still make the ride. He stood looking out over the land, over everything they'd built, and felt a sense of peace settle over him. "We did good, Beatrice," he said to the wind. "Look at all this. We built something that's going to last long after we're both gone." He thought he could feel her there with him, feel her hand in his, hear her agreement on the wind. It was probably just his imagination, his grief looking for comfort. But it felt real, and that was enough. Coleman lived for 3 more years after Beatrice's death. They were good years, full of family and work and the land he loved. He got to meet 2 more great-grandchildren and see Thomas's eldest son take over more of the day-to-day running of the ranch. He saw Rose honored by the Territorial Veterinary Association for her pioneering work. He saw James's daughters excel in school, proving they'd inherited their father's love of learning. When his time came, it was peaceful. He went to sleep one spring night and simply didn't wake up. His children said he looked peaceful, that there was a slight smile on his face. Thomas liked to think his father had seen Beatrice waiting for him, that they'd been reunited at last. They buried him next to Beatrice on the hill overlooking the ranch, just as he'd requested. The whole community turned out again, mourning the loss of a man who'd been part of Montana's history, who'd helped build the state from territory to what it was now. At the funeral, Thomas stood to give the eulogy. He talked about his father's integrity, his work ethic, his quiet strength. But mostly, he talked about the love story that had defined Coleman's life. "My father used to say that the blizzard brought him the greatest gift of his life," Thomas said. "My mother. They had 50 years together, and every single one of those years, they chose each other. Through hard times and good, through struggle and success, they chose love. They built something lasting, not just a ranch but a family, a legacy. And that's what they've left us. The example of what love looks like when it's real and true and forever." The years continued to pass, as they always do. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations. Thomas's sons ran it, then his grandsons, each generation adding their own improvements while honoring the foundation that Coleman and Beatrice had built. The original cabin was preserved as a historic site, a reminder of where it all began. The story of the blizzard became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. How Beatrice had nearly died in the snow. How Coleman had found her and brought her home. How by spring thaw, she couldn't imagine leaving him. And how that love, born in a winter storm, had lasted through 50 years and beyond, creating a legacy that would endure as long as the mountains themselves stood watch over the Montana plains. In the end, that's what mattered. Not the size of the ranch or the money in the bank. Not the awards or the recognition. What mattered was the love they'd shared, the family they'd created, the life they'd built together from nothing but hard work and devotion. They'd started with a cabin and a dream. They'd ended with a dynasty and a love story that would be told for generations. And somewhere, if you believed in such things, Coleman and Beatrice were together again, hand in hand, looking out over everything they'd created, pleased with what they'd built and the love that had made it all possible. The ranch still stood, thriving and beautiful, a testament to what 2 people could create when they had love, determination, and each other. And every spring, when the snow melted and the flowers began to bloom, it seemed like you could almost hear the echo of their voices on the wind, laughing together, planning together, loving each other as they always had and always would, world without end.